Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. I'm Brent Stevens. I'm the Executive Director and Program Director of KHFM, and of course, you probably know our special guest today, Rachel Barton Pine. Before we get going, I want to give some special thanks today to Robertson & Sons Violin Shop for making this wonderful holiday. Don designed this hall by him on his own, by the way, and it's one of the best recital halls in Albuquerque. We would very much like to thank KHFM's restaurant underwriter, Rosemary's, for providing our food, which you'll see after the show today. Support local businesses that support the arts. I would like to encourage you to turn off your mobile devices if you possibly can. You may have noticed we have some guests on the stage with us today. We'd very much like to thank Norland Blocker-Price, the Executive Director of Albuquerque Youth Symphony Program. We have some of their musicians today, and Professor Carmelo de los Santos of UNM has sent some of his string students. I hope this is a great opportunity for you to look over the shoulder and see one of the world's greatest violinists. Rachel Barton Pine, as you probably know, has performed, if you can name a major orchestra in the world, she has probably performed with them. She also performs in recitals and at chamber music festivals all over the world. She also writes, you may not know this, but her books of cadenzas for violin concertos has been published by Carl Fischer, in addition to, you're the only living composer in Carl Fischer's Masters Collection series?
Yeah, it's me and a bunch of dead men.
She also has some 37 CDs out on various labels, Avi, CD, Warner Classics, and Dorian. We're going to talk about her instruments today, but first I want to talk a bit about your life. You began playing in church, right?
Yeah, well, I first encountered the violin when there were some middle school age girls playing in church one Sunday, and I was 3 years old, and I was absolutely captivated. My parents both tell the same story, and they don't agree on much, so it must be true. Apparently, I stood up in the pew and I pointed and I said, "I want to do that." And
in the middle of a church service?
Well, hopefully I said it quietly. But in any case, they didn't totally take me seriously because the girls were wearing these beautiful long dresses. And my mom thought, I wonder what she's truly interested in. And of course, nowadays I get to wear all of these concert gowns for work, and they're tax deductible, so what could be better? But really, it was the sound of the violin that absolutely captivated me, and I kept nagging, and finally, my parents let me start lessons that summer when I was 3.5. There was a teacher in our neighborhood just a few blocks away, so it was walking distance. There were some other kids on our street that were also taking lessons, and their parents encouraged my parents to let me give it a try, and from the very first, I just fell in love with the violin, with being able to make melodies, and somehow the voice of the instrument. I mean, I'm sure I didn't sound that good at age 3.5, but it was just having that singing violin under my ear. I just became obsessed to the point where I was really self-identifying as a violinist at age 5. And part of that really goes back to my church environment, because my first public appearances, I don't want to use the word performances, but the first time I played my violin for others was during worship, little pieces by Bach and stuff like that. Our sanctuary actually has a stained glass window of Bach. It's like guy from the Bible, Bach, guy from the Bible. And I was actually embarrassingly old when I figured out that Bach wasn't in the Bible. But
I've never read the Old Testament, so for all I know.
Yeah, so just that sense of music making not being about being up there on stage and being celebrated and showing off and all of those sorts of things, but actually that you and those who are listening are all participating in the same act of experiencing the music, and that it's our role and responsibility as humans to develop the gifts that we've been given and to share them with others. And those were all things that I was learning at church as I was learning the violin and playing in church, and it all just became part of my identity as a violinist and really the meaning of my life.
And I think you told me part of doing that as almost a worship practice early, you don't really get nervous when you play.
Well, yeah, and part of that is, I was lucky enough to start homeschooling by the time I was in third grade. My school principal suggested to my parents that I discontinue attending elementary school. I promise I didn't get expelled. But he actually realized, and this is kind of amazing when you think about it, I mean, for any principal to say stop going to school, but especially back then, when homeschooling was neither as widespread nor as socially acceptable as it is today, that the principal recognized that I would actually, ironically, have a more normal life if I homeschooled, because I could do the academic work in a more condensed way, spread it out over 12 months a year, 7 days a week. So I never got a school vacation, but I never had to do more than 2 or 3 hours of school work per day. I could do my violin practice during school hours, and for the first time since kindergarten, I could actually have my afternoons to myself to play with other kids and hang out and be a normal kid before going off to my evening rehearsals.
So you got everything, unlike the Rockwell painting of the kid inside playing the violin or the piano and the boys outside with the baseball. You got to do everything?
Well, here's the brilliant thing. So, since I was, out there doing public concerts, we didn't have the option of being in the closet as homeschoolers, which a lot of families were in those days. And so whenever the homeschooling advocacy folks needed a representative homeschooler to go and do some television interview or something, they would always ask us whether we'd be willing, and we usually were. And so one time I was on this television program, and of course, as the media likes to do, they were trying to be very sensationalistic. So they said, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning and all the other kids on your block are going off to school and you have to stay home? And I said, what are you talking about? I don't have to wake up that early. So it was pretty sweet.
How old were you when you first played with the Chicago Symphony, your hometown band?
Yeah, so I made my debut as soloist with a professional orchestra when I was 7 and had a few gigs in the intervening years, and then I did my big debut with CSO when I was 10, and that was such an amazing experience because Eric Kleinsdorf was actually the conductor.
Oh, wow.
Did the Saint-Saëns introduction and Rondo Capriccioso. And I mean, I had already decided that I was meant to be a violinist and I wanted to be a violinist and so on, but just experiencing making music with musicians of that caliber, one of the best orchestras of the world, I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to do this forever. It was so inspiring.
Oh yeah, I'll bet. It's like driving the Cadillac when you can't even get a driver's license yet.
Yeah. So what you were saying about being nervous, well, being homeschooled, of course, I had all the time in the world to practice as much as I possibly wanted to. And so if you're over-prepared, there's like literally no reason to be nervous, right?
You say that, but I feel over-prepared and I'm nervous anyway.
Actually, I'm nervous every time I have to give a speech. So probably a lot of it is experience because I haven't given nearly as many speeches in my life as concerts.
Is it because of your experience as a young person that you give back so much to the community in terms of education and in terms of supporting young musicians coming up?
Yeah, so by the time I was in high school, we were actually enrolled in a national homeschooling program that catered to kids with special interests. Because obviously there are different reasons why one might homeschool. There are faith-based families. There were, we're a family of faith, but that wasn't why we homeschooled, And there are people that want to just have alternative lifestyles, people who want to have a more rigorous academic route, and they're taking all the college classes at age 10 or whatever they're doing. But we fell into that smallest category of kids that were already had a determined career path. So child actors, Olympians, things like that. Kids who had a, I don't want to say a job, but, something that a special interest, and the homeschooling needed to accommodate their schedule. And anyways, so we enrolled in this program during my high school years so that we could send the work to them and get a diploma at the end of the day. Remember, this is before internet courses and all of that, so we had to do it all on paper. So interestingly, this program based in Michigan called Clonlara, as part of the requirements for graduation, besides a certain number of credit hours and certain academic subjects and the normal stuff you would expect, you were required to do 200 hours of community service in order to graduate. And I think this is just such a brilliant idea, because they were not only making sure you were educated enough to begin your adult life, but also that there were certain values that they made sure were instilled. And so knowing that I needed to get these 200 credit hours of community service, I started looking for creative ways to do things, and some of it was the normal stuff, the church soup kitchen or whatever, but then starting to think about how can I use my violin to serve others beyond the stage. And that was in the days before community engagement was so normal. I mean, gosh, I used to go to orchestras that didn't have pre-concert conversations, like the bad old days.
You've been coming here since, we figured, probably the mid to late 1990s.
Exactly.
I used to be the orchestra manager of the predecessor to the New Mexico Philharmonic, the New Mexico Symphony. So I actually wrote her first contract to come to Albuquerque and play, and we've known each other for however long that is, since she was 3.5 and I was 18. But right from the get-go, we had to catch up to you. You wanted to go to radio stations and play rock music. You would do anything, and I think you were. I really think of you as one of the first examples of of your generation of musicians.
I remember the rock station here did the coolest thing. I forget what their number on the dial was. 94 or something like that. So, or it must be 94 point something. So whatever that was, they said anybody who calls in to get a ticket to the symphony because they heard Rachel on the rock station can buy their ticket for $9.40 something cents. And you could tell who they were in the crowd at the concert. But it was brilliant. I was like, you can wear your jeans, just, maybe wear your nice jeans, but come on down. and they did. It was so cool.
One of your 37 albums is a heavy metal album, which is really cool. But so you did reach out a lot. You also do other things. Tell me about the Rachel Barton Pine Foundation and what that does.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So this is actually a 501c3 full-fledged charity that I started with my now husband back when I was in my early 20s. And growing up, unfortunately, my family had a very struggling time financially. My father was frequently out of work, and because she was homeschooling me, my mother didn't have a full-time job. And so consequently, our phone and electricity were frequently getting shut off, and we were often one missed payment away from losing the roof over our heads. So it was a very stressful and tenuous existence. We managed to kind of squeak by with help from our church, from our extended family, and then, of course, when I got a bit older, some of the music gigs that I was able to do. But it was always like, okay, how the heck are we going to pay for groceries this week and put enough gas in the tank of the car to drive to your lessons? And it was on that level. And, I had, of course, a full scholarship for my lessons, but that scholarship didn't cover a bow repair or new strings for my violin or the purchase of sheet music for the next piece that I'd been assigned or the piano accompanist fee. Or, concert clothes. My mom would go to the thrift store and get some used bridesmaid's dress and then try to fix it up, kind of like the Cinderella story or something, except without the help of the birds. So basically, thanks to patrons and different people, and of course I had borrowed instruments throughout my childhood, so I really wanted to give back, and so I was able to start my foundation for the purpose of young artist support, and actually, of course, there are a number of instrument loan programs throughout the country, of which we are one, but our financial assistance program is unique of its type because we invite anyone from age 10 to 30 to apply, and we evaluate them based on their demonstrated financial need, the tax documents and all that from the parents or themselves, and then also their statement about their life goals. So they want, they have to desire to live a life in music, not be the most talented kid who's going to actually major in medicine. And then thirdly, of course, they have to have a high degree of accomplishment. So essentially poor prodigies. And, either kids who are, struggling to pay for the basics for their music education, or young artists who are struggling to launch their careers. And we've helped more than 100 young people now over the last, what would it be, almost 20 years. So it's been a real joy, a real blessing, and I'm so grateful to all of our donors and supporters who've helped us in this work.
What's the website?
RBP, that's Rachel Barton Pine, rbpfoundation.org.
Just in case you need to do some net surfing when you get home after today.
Thank you.
You, in addition to playing the Romantic and classical repertoire, you seem to have a great interest in repertoire of all periods. Where did that come from?
Actually, from the homeschooling. Two reasons that the homeschooling inspired my wider interests. One was the luxury of time. You know, kids who would be in high school, you know, they'd be in high school all day, and then they get home and they'd still have homework to do, and then they would have to squish in there practicing, and no social life, and certainly no, you know, sitting at the library all day because you felt like it. So, you know, with my academics being able to be more condensed, I was able to just, if I was curious about something, I could indulge in going to the library and finding a book, and then something else sparked my interest, and I could, you know, go to the book that the footnotes mentioned, and then read some dissertation, and then just like go hog wild. And so I was very curious about the concept of historically informed performance, particularly the improvised ornaments. And so I sought out some specialists in early music performance practice.